Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. All right, welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. Today is Friday, the 9th of September, 2022, and my name is Paul Lefevre. I'm here with my Ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn, and on our 40th episode, we're bringing back one of our blacksmith authors, Patrick O'Kelly. How you doing, sir?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, we are excited. I'm really excited about this podcast. It's a third in our series of UW and the Carolinas. We're learning a lot about guys that just got around and stomped some British balls into the ground. We're learning about a guy today that I don't think anybody really knows about. Who are we learning about today, Pat?
The fellow we're talking about today is William Richardson Davie, and he had a major impact on the war, and he actually stopped the British invasion of North Carolina for a few months, all by his little lonesome with 50 guys.
Wow. 50 guys.
So, Pat, why haven't I ever heard of this guy? I mean, I've heard of the Swamp Fox. I've heard of
Sumter.
I've heard of all these characters. Why don't we know about Mr. Davie here?
Public relations. You got to figure Marion and Sumter had an author. The guy's name is Weems. By the way, the guy is notorious. I think I talked about him last time we did a broadcast.
Yeah.
The guy would write these sensational books that was all bullcrap. And literally, most of what we know about Washington, chopping down the cherry tree and stuff like that, that came from Weems. And even Marion, Swamp Fox, and Sumter, the Gamecock, almost everything you know about is bullcrap. So Weems would scratch the surface on history and then just add a bunch of stuff. So he wrote only about a handful of people. That's why we know about him. Now you got to realize, though, there was not just dozens, there was hundreds of these partisans. Back then they called them partisans. The term guerrilla wasn't in yet, but basically they were guerrillas. And you had some that had, just four guys who were buddies and went out and wreaked havoc, and you had some that had hundreds. But there was just these little groups all over the place. I mean, think a good example is Ukraine right now. Look at all the little groups of just independent guys going around messing everything up. They're not really part of the army. They're just on their own. They're just doing things because they can.
Yeah, and I had something that we like to bring up in this series also is this is what's part of what we call irregular warfare, which is defined as a violent struggle among state and non-state actors for legitimacy and influence over the relevant population. And when I remember you talking to me about this guy before, William Richardson Davie, and this guy you said he was kind of what'd you say, like more like a Delta Force guy?
He's probably the closest thing I've ever seen to a Delta Force mentality.
Yeah.
He's probably the scariest guy too, because it was said that he killed more British soldiers. As an officer, he killed more British soldiers than any of the officers. But he wasn't this imposing guy. He wasn't this. I wouldn't even say he's like a Type A personality. He was just a guy that got stuff done. So if you think about the professionalism of modern day Delta trooper, he gets the job done. He goes in, he gets it. If you're going to die, if the orders are you're going to die, he's going to kill you. He's going to get out. And he's not going to make a big fanfare about it. He's just in, out, mission completed. And Davie was like that. Davie was very precise and surgical. And like I said, it was downright scary. The Brits didn't want anything to do with him if he was around.
Yeah, this is a guy that's from upcountry, I guess. Would we say that upcountry, Carolina?
Well, actually, he's from Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte, Salisbury. He was a lawyer, so he was a city lawyer. Even though the city of Charlotte in 1780 was only 50 houses. Wow. So you got to imagine Charlotte has 50 houses, but that was considered huge. You got to figure all the other settlements might have 10 houses. So he's a city lawyer. He was born in England. He wasn't even from over here, but his parents came to South Carolina when he was like 8 years old. And then he ended up inheriting 150 acres of land, which gave him not just money, but one of the biggest things he inherited, which was a huge plus, was his father had a library, and the library was full of books, mainly law books. So he started teaching himself law. Then he ended up going to Princeton, and he graduated from Princeton about 1776. And you got to realize who was in Princeton in 1776. If I'm not mistaken, it was
Brits.
Well, not the Brits.
I'm talking about famous Americans.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm talking about in the school. John Quincy Adams was there.
Oh, okay, yeah. Gotcha.
Mason was there. So there's all these guys that he went to school with are guys who were power hitters later on in American history.
And he's rubbing elbows.
But anyway,
wow.
We come back. He studies law, and so he's in South Carolina, or he's in North Carolina when the British decide to invade the South. And I probably need to set that up because a lot of people don't know the Revolutionary War.
That's true.
So basically, what the British did was initially it was a local rebellion. So the British mainly fought in Massachusetts. There's a local rebellion in Massachusetts. Well, this local rebellion spread to all 13 colonies. So now the Brits are like, crap, what do we do now? And so they needed to have a base. And basically a base would be a port. And so you could come in and out and work out from there and take back the country. We do the same thing. Think of us, like in a place like Kandahar. You work there and go out and try to take back the country. Well, initially they decided they'll take Charleston because they figured the North was going to be too hard to take. Well, when they tried to take Charleston in 1776, they were stopped at Fort Sumter. I mean, I'm messing up my wars here. Fort Moultrie. Holy cow, Sumter. Hey, Fort Sullivan, Fort Moultrie. So they were stopped there. So they went and they invaded New York. So they're operating out in New York. Well, something happened. A series of events happened where all of a sudden the South was kind of open. And so the British decided, let's try a Southern campaign, a second front, and we'll hit them from both sides. We'll hit them from the North and the South. So what they did was for a second time, they went after Charleston. But this time they did it right, and they captured Charleston. And when they captured Charleston, they captured the entire Southern Continental Army. It was the largest defeat in American history until World War II when we lost the Philippines. But it was a massive defeat. So now that the Brits are in South Carolina, they start, doing things. And that's when Davie comes back up. He starts reacting. And he basically organizes a conventional militia cavalry unit. And he starts, trying to do conventional warfare, and he's pretty good at it. He was in a battle called Stono Ferry, ends up getting wounded, and so he was out of the war for about another year until he recovered from wounds. But that is where it's a huge plus because he wasn't captured, and he never took parole from the British. So he's a loose cannon now, and he is able to counteract what the British do when they start invading North Carolina in 1780.
So he's got, you've got this situation in 1780, if I remember, where you have this vacuum, I guess. You've had in Charleston, you've had, I think the army of Lincoln was bottled up. And then you've got,
it fell, yeah.
So the whole basically the largest Patriot army in the South, I believe, was in Charleston, and it got just,
right.
They were toast, all their eggs in one basket. And then you had these guys like Davie and Marion that just kind of
Davie, Marion, Sumter, and they were all just beginning. All of this is happening about the same time. Yeah, you got to realize what's cool about this is it's amazing how all these little partisans all organized almost at the exact same time. You're looking at the organization of all the guerrilla warfare in the South starts around August of 1780.
Yeah.
And Marion is ordered to Georgetown to take that bunch of militia there. You're not good to us anyway, so do something with them. And he ends up becoming the guerrilla he was. Sumter, same thing. He actually took parole and said, I'm not going to fight anymore. And then the Brits did something stupid like burn his house and threaten his wife. So he comes in. All of this happens around August of 1780. Well, Davie, the reason the British start heading into North Carolina is the British were basically had all these outposts all across the border in North Carolina and South Carolina. The British were told, don't go into North Carolina. It was Cornwallis who was ordered, do not go into North Carolina. If you go to North Carolina, you'll spread yourself too thin, and they might be able to get you because the British lost an entire army when that happened up in north at Saratoga. Burgoyne overstretched his lines, and he was captured at Saratoga. And the men to make sure that did not happen again. So the British were told, don't go into North Carolina. But what the British did do was, little cross-border raids, mainly getting food and stuff from farms and things like that. And so what happened was, I'm looking at my notes here. All right, there was 2 forts. One was called Flat Rock, and one was called Hanging Rock. And Hanging Rock was the big one, and Flat Rock was the little one. Now, Davy first came to light. Sumter noticed who he was because he decided to take his guys, his little partisan group, and try to stop these Brits that were crossing the border into North Carolina and stealing food and stuff like that. So what he did was he knew where the British were coming because he was pretty good at reconnaissance. That's one thing. He's good at intelligence and reconnaissance. So he figured out their pattern. He set up an ambush, but here's the amazing thing. He set up a night ambush. Now, what's amazing about that is you didn't do night fighting in the age of flintlock muskets. It just didn't happen. And part of the reason was, you got to realize what a flintlock is. When you pull the trigger, there's a big, bright flash of light right in your eyeball. And so you did not do night fighting. There's a few famous instances where the British did night fighting where all they used was a bayonet. One was the massacre at Paoli, where they literally went into Paoli up north and they hit a Continental camp at night, and all they used was the bayonet. Because they knew if you go around shooting muskets, you're going to lose all your night vision. You can't see shit. So Davy, though, did a night ambush. He was able to hit this British convoy. When he did, he was able to take what he wanted, destroy the convoy. Then he took the prisoners, doubled them up on horses, and rode off. Now, next day, there's a British mounted patrol out there that basically is able to ambush Davy, but he's able to flank them and chase them off. But then he realizes he's outnumbered. So what does Davy do? And this, like I said, this is where it's, you don't mess with him. Davy realized all the prisoners that he had on his horse would slow him down. He killed all the prisoners. Just killed them. And then he quickly got a guide who was a loyalist to guide him back to his own lines because he lost some of his guides too. Now, that may seem cruel in our terms, but again, think of modern special operations. The old dilemma, and every time you go through SF courses, there's this dilemma. Okay, if you're out on a recon point and a site, and all of a sudden somebody comes up and sees you, what do? Do you kill them? Do you take them prisoner? Do you tie them up, leave them there? What do you do? And so the option of killing them, even though it may sound cruel, it is an option. It has always been an option. I mean, the guys who jumped into Normandy, they didn't take prisoners because they could not take any prisoners with them. They're a bunch of paratroopers behind enemy lines. So when Davy killed these guys that were his prisoners, it was because he's behind enemy lines and he had no other option. So in other words, he didn't do it because he was sadistic or cruel, but he did it because that's what you needed to get the job done. So there was no emotion, just kill him, go. Now, because of that ambush, and he was so successful at taking down that convoy, Sumter heard about him. And so Sumter came to him and said, hey, I want to attack the main place at Hanging Rock, the big one. And I want you to do a diversion attack at Flat Rock. Now, Davy did a recon. Flat Rock, there's 500 guys there. Now, Davy's only got like about 60 guys. So how do you take out 500 guys with 60 guys? And they're also in a fort. They're in a defensive position. Well, Davy was like, I'm not going to attack the fort. That's stupid. But in front of the fort, there was a camp with brand new loyalist recruits. They had just got issued their uniforms. They just got issued their muskets. They were training them. And so he decides that's what he's going to take out as the diversion. Now, 40 guys. He left some, to guard back in the rear. So 40 guys, they rode right into the loyalist camp. Didn't attack it. They just rode in like they belonged there. They dressed up like them. And so all in civilian clothes because they're brand new recruits. So they can't tell who's who because it's all civilian clothes. So he rides right in the middle of them. He rides right past the sentries. The sentries didn't challenge him because they just thought they were loyalists. His men calmly got off their horses, took out their muskets, and then fired and just started slaughtering everybody. Now, the loyalists panicked, freaked out, ran to the fort, but the other half of Davy's men that were waiting there, and they hit him in an ambush. He just took these guys out. Now, the British were watching them, and they were ready to come out. And Davy again once realized, I can't take prisoners, so he didn't take any prisoners. He killed them, but he was able to take 60 horses. He got 100 brand new muskets that had just been issued, and then he pulled out. Now Davy's attack on Hanging Rock on Flat Rock was a diversion, totally successful. Sumter was not successful. He attacked Hanging Rock and ended up losing and suffering massive losses. But Davy was very successful at what he did. Get in, get out, because that's the mission.
Now, Flat Rock's in North Carolina.
Yeah, both of these are in South Carolina.
Because we have a Flat Rock and a Hanging Rock, North Carolina.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
and you got to realize there's like a deep creek in both states. People weren't real original when they named stuff. It's like, hey, that's mountain has a Hanging Rock. We'll call it Hanging Rock.
So are these locations? Are they in proximity to one another? Are they both up country or?
You look at Hanging Rock as a main base and Flat Rock as like an outpost from that base. They were probably about, I want to say probably 20 miles apart.
Oh, not too far then.
And no, not too far at all. But it was a series of these outposts all along the border of North Carolina, because you're basically watching the border because you're trying to make sure nobody comes across. Yep. But the main one was Hanging Rock. Now Hanging Rock, it still exists today. You can go there. I went there. I was kind of disappointed because it was a place where teenagers had sex, and so there's a lot of graffiti and and bottles and trash and stuff. But it's still there. I mean, it's just never was made into a really cool park, which is pretty bad because I'm about to tell you about one kick-ass battle here in a minute.
So hey, it seems like Davy is almost the antithesis of Marion in a sense that Marion restrained his guys. Marion wasn't into, at least in my understanding, killing prisoners, but Davy was all about it if it need be.
Yeah, it wasn't like I wouldn't say restrained his guys. It was just what comes first, the mission or these prisoners' lives. Yeah, and so if the mission.
Extremely
they're going to do it.
Would you say extremely different personalities, though?
Yeah. But again, I can't
one more
reserved,
one more flamboyant.
It's very cold and calculating. There was not a lot of emotion. He wasn't like a sadistic guy. Because later on, he took lots of prisoners. I mean, he treated them rather well. But if the mission, about the best example I can use is think of the American paratroopers in Normandy. They did not take prisoners because you couldn't. And I know it's against, America's we're the good guys and we don't kill prisoners. Well, yeah, we do. There's a whole history of it, depending on the situation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now, here's something else that's interesting. One of the youngest guys riding with Davy is a 13-year-old kid by the name of Andrew Jackson.
Wow.
So Andrew Jackson is learning how to be he learned how to be a lawyer with Davy. And he learned how to fight with Davy.
Wow. Interesting.
I got a quote here. Here's a quote from Jackson himself. He said, "I was never regularly enlisted, being only 14 when the war ended. Whenever I took the field, it was with Colonel Davy, who never put me in the ranks, but used me as a mounted orderly or messenger, for which I was well fitted, being a good rider and knowing all the roads in that region. The only weapon I had was a pistol that Colonel Davy gave me." So, he gives him a lot of credit.
Well, and they're both out of the Waxhaws.
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
Well, it's amazing. You mentioned the similarities and differences between him and Marion, but the other thing too is a lot of similarities is the fact that he got injured and had to be left to Charleston area to recover from wounds.
Yeah.
And
he ended up going to Charlotte to recover from wounds.
Yeah. And this, which is again away from the action really down at Charleston.
Yeah.
Hey, and what was?
There's a lot of interesting characters, I guess, come out of this border region, this upcountry region.
Yeah. It's your Scotch Irish, and I actually hate using that term Scotch Irish because I'm Irish. Scotch Irish is actually a term that was created in the 19th century, and it was because it was like the old Irish didn't want to be associated with the new Irish, and so they came up with the term Scotch Irish. And but basically, it was the Irish and the Scottish settlers all along the Yadkin River Valley and the and the PD region and stuff like that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of tough characters from there because of that.
I had a question for you, Pat. So Davy goes off, he fights this battle, Flat Rock, right? And this is before Gates. This is before Camden.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is before really a lot of organization has been underway. So this guy just kind of takes it under him, on himself to make this happen. So that's just amazing to me. Yeah, there's no organization, and it's just amazing to me that you had these guys, these patriots in the Carolinas that just took it upon themselves to do something, and they didn't just go, well, I guess the cause is lost, and that's what's amazing. This guy has some balls. And he's not afraid to go to head with these guys. So
I think the modern analogy would be look at Ukraine, the guys that just started fighting, because they could, and nobody else is going to do it. So I got to get in there and do it. Now, so Davy did finally get a nickname. It wasn't Davy himself, but his men, because they were literally cold, calculating Delta Force looking dudes. They became known as the Bloody Corps. And so they're always called the Bloody Corps. But here's the deal. The description of the Bloody Corps, it says it numbered about 80 men, and they were described as behaved well. Now think about that. Normally when you think of something like Bloody Corps, you think of a bunch of, redneck, crazy guys running around. But no, they were behaved well. Davy, just like Marion, believed in discipline. You will do what I say, when I say it, and how I say it. And so he had very disciplined guys. And you're going to find out. I'm going to talk about the big battle here in a minute where you're going to see how disciplined his guys are. But let's carry on with it. What happened next? All right. What happened next was basically it's the Battle of Hanging Rock, because Sumter didn't take Hanging Rock. Now, the Battle of Hanging Rock, in my opinion, is a battle that really ought to get a lot of history, and it never does, because it is incredibly bloody and brutal. I mean, you got to figure that it was just a massive amount of men were shot and killed in this battle. Well, hardly anybody even knows about this battle. Now, what happened was Sumter had intelligence that the Hanging Rock garrison had been weakened. So Sumter asked all the partisans in the region to come to him, and they're going to all attack together. So what you're starting to see here is you're starting to see the first-time organization. And so Sumter's the guy that's organizing all these partisans. Now, he brings them all together, and Sumter decides we're going to attack not the fort at Hanging Rock, but there was a series of camps outside, because all of a sudden his intelligence at Hanging Rock had been weakened. Turned out to be bad intelligence. They had actually been strengthened by 1,500 men. And so those men were outside in 3 camps near the place called Hanging Rock. Now, Sumter only had 600 guys. So 600 guys are going to attack 1,500 men. Now, Davy said, how you should do it is slowly get off your horses, slowly creep up to them, and then hit them. But Sumter and all the other guys were like, no, we're just going to ride in there at blaze, and that'll get them. That'll have fear. Well, that was a bonehead idea. Sumter made a lot of mistakes. He was always kind of successful in the long run, but he made a lot of mistakes. He also tended to lose a lot more than they won. So Davy was not listened to. Now they're going to attack these 3 camps. Sumter breaks his group up into 3 groups. Each group will attack a camp at the same time. Now, Davy's camp was on the right flank. To get to this camp, this is wild. They had to fight across a river. It says climb a steep cliff. So basically what it tells me is he had to climb up the Hanging Rock, which was a big, I'm not going to call it a mountain, but it's a big old hill. And all the time they were under fire by the loyalists. But
they're attacking some loyalists and British camps. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was. You got to realize this is one of those fights where everybody in the fight is an American. That a lot of the fights in the South were done by troops known as provincials, and provincials were Americans fighting for the king, but wore a red coat. In other words, they looked like British soldiers. They looked like redcoats, but they were Americans. So these are all provincials. There's also Loyalist militia. The nickname for them were the Tories. Yeah. And Loyalist militia wore civilian clothes. So you had Loyalist militia there. You had provincials there. And you had a really good, one of the better provincial units there, a unit called the Prince of Wales Regiment. They were well trained, well armed, and knew what they were doing. Now, Davy hits the camp on the right, even though he's under intense fire and he had to climb a mountain and everything. He's able to rout that camp to the point that they run. And when they run, he's got them because they mount their horses, chase them down, and they said it was routed with great slaughter. So Davy hits the right camp, and it's successful. Sumter hits the middle camp. Now, here's the deal with Sumter. This is kind of interesting about his men, and it's nothing bad against Sumter. It's just the way it was. When Sumter attacked, all his men only had about 5 rounds each. Sumter told them, you'll get your ammo as you go. So as they attacked and were successful, they would take weapons and they would take ammunition off the bodies of the loyalists. They also did something, this is kind of interesting too, that when they charged, they would charge in doing something they called the Indian halloo. And they just made this wild, crazy sound like the Indians made. Well, years later, in another war, this became known as the rebel yell. So you see the origin of the rebel yell during the Revolutionary War. They just didn't call it a rebel yell. They called it an Indian halloo. Now, let me read a description of Sumter's men as they're attacking. This is first person. It says, the partisans fired on the enemy as they went, with bullets in their mouths and powder in their pockets. And the load as they run was by no means to take a tree where trees were. So basically, they had gunpowder loose in their pockets, bullets in their mouth. They'd grab a handful of gunpowder, shove it down the barrel, spit the bullet in the barrel, ram it down, and fire. And so they're moving fast. It's a constant moving while this is going on. Now, what they bump into is that really good provincial unit, the Prince of Wales Regiment, and they basically cannot move them. These guys take a stand, and they could keep firing until they ran out of ammo. Now, Davy, he's already captured his camp, but they're moving on to Sumter's camp. Davy tells his men, his riflemen, take out the leaders. So basically what Davy does, he deploys snipers. And so as they are fighting the Prince of Wales Regiment, all of a sudden their officers are going down, left, right, left, and they're being hit because of Davy's snipers. Now, pretty soon it said there was no British officer standing, and the Prince of Wales Regiment was virtually destroyed. Now, here's where you see the compassion of Davy. Davy wades through the fighting and yells at them, surrender. If you surrender, we will treat you okay. You're not going to be harmed. He's trying to get them surrender, but they refuse. These guys are going to fight to the last man. So they literally fight until there's almost nobody left. So that's a hell of a unit, man. Now, what happens next? And this is something in history that a lot of people don't think happened in the Revolutionary War. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British would form a square. And it's kind of famous. The Battle of Waterloo, the squares were famous. And it's called a hollow square because inside there's no men. It's all 4 sides. Well, that actually originated earlier. And during the Battle of Hanging Rock, the British formed a square. So all the survivors that are left after the attack, they form a square, and they got cannons on each of the 4 corners of the square. Now, from that point, it was kind of a stalemate. They fought for 3 hours more. But what happened was the partisans, the Americans, or not all Americans, but Davy and Sumter and those guys, they can't get to the square because of the artillery and the firepower. But the loyalists can't leave because they're surrounded by partisans. Now, what happened was the Sumter's men found the liquor supplies, and they began drinking. Because, they're just sniping, and they ain't nothing better to do, so they're sitting around there drinking. They got rid of it. These guys hadn't eaten in 12 hours, so all they're doing is drinking probably rum, because that was the mainstay of most military. So these guys are down in rum on a hot day in July or in August, and drink, and they haven't eaten. Now, these guys end up getting drunk as a skunk. But Davy ordered his men, no, you do not drink. And his men did not. That goes back to that discipline. His men wouldn't drink. So what happened was when they finally withdrew, Davy's men were the guys who held off the loyalists because all the other guys were drunken bums trying to walk down the road in a straight line. So Davy was able to hold back the British so that they could, I'm not going to say get away because it was a stalemate. The British had lost so many. You got to realize in that fight, the loyalists lost 200 killed and wounded. And 75 were captured. And Sumter and Davy and those guys, they only lost 20 men killed and 40 wounded. So it was really one-sided. But here's the good thing about Hanging Rock. Before Hanging Rock, there was a chance that we were going to lose the war because everything was bad news here, bad news that. And so there was actually negotiations with Britain to end the war where Britain would have parts of the United States. In other words, they would keep New York and they would keep basically South Carolina. But after Hanging Rock, all of a sudden it boosted morale. And it's like, oh, this is awesome, man. We might win. And so the boost of morale, all of a sudden people aren't talking about having a surrender document with England anymore.
See, that's amazing. And this is the kind of stuff that I wish they would teach in school, because I think the Revolutionary War, a lot of people think it was just a really quick event, but it dragged on for years and years. Yeah. And there were definitely a lot of low points. And like you're saying, these little victories here, man, just did a lot to encourage the effort to continue on.
Yeah. Now, what happened next was, again, one of the worst defeats. Davy wasn't involved. Well, he was there at the end, but we're talking about the Battle of Camden. Camden had Horatio Gates, and I'm not going to go through Camden again. Basically, in a nutshell, it was a total defeat on the American side. It was a one-sided victory, and Gates ran from the field. He actually got on a horse and rode away and left his army on the field. And so the General Horatio Gates was the guy who was the hero of Saratoga. When he comes down south, he gets his ass handed to him, and he has to flee. Well, as he's fleeing, he bumps into Davy, who was riding up with his men to go to the battle. And he tells Davy that he should return to Charlotte because the British Dragoons are going to be on him soon. Tarleton's Dragoon. And Tarleton was a really famous British Dragoon officer. Davy basically told Gates, hey, we know Tarleton. We don't fear Tarleton. We beat Tarleton. And so we're just going to stay here. And so Gates I say retreat. Let the dead bury the dead. And Davy ignored him. And he decided, he asked another general, so what should I do? I don't have any orders. And the general replied, just as far as you please, for you will never see Gates again. So Davy can do what the hell he wants because nobody's in charge again. So he returns to Charlotte.
Nice. Yeah, and so you had another vacuum where, I think it was a while until you had who replaced Gates? I can't remember.
Greene.
Yeah, Greene. Yeah.
Well, Gates,
so you had a
Greene
while before that happened.
Well, Greene's much later, isn't he?
Yeah.
You're talking. That was in August.
Yeah. And
so until October is when Greene showed up. So you had about 2 months. Now I'm not going to say there was Gates is still there, even though he ran from the battlefield. He's still there. What was left after the Battle of Camden, which is actually quite a few men, but they're all in Charlotte, but there's a lot of wounded in Charlotte. And so they're recovering. And remember, the British were told, don't go into North Carolina. Well, the guy who's in charge of the British in South Carolina is Cornwallis, General Cornwallis. And he decides, I might want to go into North Carolina, if nothing else, to get that Continental Army. But he decides to let the British raid into North Carolina again. Now, another raid happens where Davy ends up being a guy who comes out on top. This is a plantation, and it's spelled really weird. It's spelled Wauchope, but how it's pronounced is Wahab. Wahab's plantation, right? So I don't know how you got Wahab out of Wachope or whatever, how you spell it, but it's Wahab. Now, Davy realizes there's people coming into North Carolina raiding farms again, so he's going to take care of that. Now, this is near Charlotte, because that's where Davy is working at. He's working out of Charlotte. Now, Wahab's plantation, turns out there's a group of 300 Highlanders from the 71st Highland Regiment. They're there raiding the farms and everything else. And Davy decides, okay, I can take them. Now, Davy has how many? I'm trying to look at how many men. Davy's got like 100 guys. He's going to take on 300 Highlanders. Now, what Davy does, he breaks up into 3 groups. One group is at the road leading to the plantation. One group is the road coming out of the plantation. And then one group made up of basically his snipers will creep through a cornfield until they get within range and start sniping. Now, when the snipers start sniping, the Highlanders freak out, run one way down the road to escape, and they hit Davies' men, get ambushed. Run the other way, go down the road, they hit Davies' men, get ambushed. And then they come on fire from three sides, getting ambushed. Now, they freak out, run away. They had 20 men killed, 47 wounded. Davy only had one man wounded, and that was by accident. It was friendly fire. Now, he also gets 96 horses and 120 muskets. But here's why that is important, why this little fight on a plantation is important. Way down in South Carolina, Cornwallis is so ticked off at the fact that he can't go into North Carolina to get the remains of the army that he beat in Camden. But now you got Davy, messing up his men and slaughtering them. That's it. Cornwallis decides to invade North Carolina. He decides to go to Charlotte.
That's right. So this was actually before Kings Mountain.
Yeah, Kings Mountain happens. It's actually
around this.
Cornwallis is a really squared away guy. He's a really good officer, a really good strategy. The only reason he lost was because he had so many. He was outnumbered. It's like us in Vietnam. We won constantly, but eventually we had to get out of there because we were outnumbered. Well, Cornwallis, when he went into Charlotte, he had his flanks covered, and on one flank, on the basically, if you're heading toward the east of Charlotte, you had a guy going up there, and he ends up having a fight at a place called Musgrove Mill. The other guy, the other British officer, is Ferguson, and he is told to go out west to make sure those people back there don't rise up against us. Now, Ferguson screws up, and that's a whole nother story for a whole other time. We could talk about that, but at Kings Mountain, he gets beat, slaughtered, right. And because of that, all of a sudden, Cornwallis's flank is wide open. So he actually went in there with, keeping his flanks guarded, and his officers on each flank screw up and end up getting beat. And so he's kind of stuck on his own in Charlotte. Now let's talk about Charlotte. Charlotte Maritime. Charlotte's all like 50 houses. That's it. Now, inside Charlotte is the entire Continental Army, which is it's 6 companies. That's all that's left after Camden. But those 6 companies are all that's left after Camden. You got to take care of them. And so they don't want to get captured. So Davy is given the order, slow down the British when they come into Charlotte. Davy has 50 guys, and he's going to slow down the entire British Army coming up north. Now, one good thing happened, this is a little bit of providence happened, is the British were stricken with yellow fever. Due to that, some of their top leaders, their top commanders are out of this fight. Like Tarleton, he's bedridden. Cornwallis is kind of bedridden. So basically this fight is made up of like the second string, the B team. And so they go into Charlotte with a lot of them in sick from yellow fever, but it didn't matter. Davy was still outnumbered, probably 10-1. Now, if in the South at that time, the courthouse was not just a place for court. It was where people met, you traded, you had all sorts of things. Everything was based around the courthouse. Now, because it's so hot, the floor was raised up. And so, you could walk around underneath it. A good example, if you've ever been to Fayetteville and you look at the courthouse in the middle of Fayetteville, it's got a raised up floor where the actual courthouse is like on the second floor. And that's so it's not so hot. There's ventilation and stuff like that. Well, Charlotte was the same way. It had a raised up floor, but at the bottom there was a brick wall about chest high. Davy sticks a handful of his guys, his riflemen, his best shots, at that wall. He tells them, when they come down the road, you start sniping, take out everybody important. Now, when the British come into Charlotte, they start getting shot at by these guys in the courthouse. They get ticked off at that. They try to flank it, but when they flank, Davy also put his men in houses. So now the British have got snipers from the houses, snipers from the doors. It's urban warfare, but with a flintlock musket. And so they try to take they try to flank them. They can't. They try to rush them. They can't. They get shot to pieces, man. And so eventually, though, it is the entire, not the entire British Army, but a good, healthy chunk of the British Army. And so Davy is outnumbered, and he finally has to pull out of Charlotte. Now, I think I said he did it with 50 men. I'm looking at my notes here. He actually did it with 150 men. But still, 150 men against a whole army. Now, Well, what happened was Davy lost 5 guys killed in this fight, 6 wounded. But the British lost over 30, and most of those were the critical officers that they would need later on. Now, Davy slowed the British down so that the Continentals were able to get away to the town of Salisbury. And so he's successful. And he, like I said, he had very few men get killed, but he's able to slow them down, get away. He did that by looking at the terrain, which was urban warfare. And so again, he's thinking outside the box, and he's using almost like modern urban warfare techniques to take down guys on horse and guys on with flintlocks. Now, Cornwallis is in Charlotte. Now what? Now, remember I told you about Kings Mountain? That guy gets captured. Over Musgrove's Mill, those guys get beat. So Cornwallis is now all by himself in Charlotte. So you only stay there for like 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, there's so many, this constant harassment from Davy and his men. Cornwallis said that being in Charlotte is like living in a hornet's nest. To this day, the symbol of Charlotte is a hornet's nest. And like their basketball team is called the Hornets. And it was all because of the crap that Davy did. All right. Now, my whole story I talked about Davy there is July to October of 1780. So let's see, August, September, October. You look at 3 months. That was 3 months. That's the entire partisan time of Davy. Because what happens is when General Greene takes over the army, he realizes Davy is a smart guy. He makes Davy his quartermaster. Now, you may think that's really stupid, but General Greene started as a quartermaster. And he knew that was such an important position because once you can figure out how to defeat the enemy by stopping his supplies, you can win the war. Now, Greene wanted Davy to do it. Davy wasn't real thrilled about it, but Greene knew that was how you get your smartest guy to be the quartermaster. He would know how to interdict the lines and how to stop, and he knows what you're looking for.
Beans and bullets.
Now, yeah.
It's always beans and bullets.
Yep, definitely. Logistics. Oh, that's the old story that amateurs study tactics.
That's right.
Professionals study logistics.
That's absolutely correct.
Now, Davy, like I said, Davy was supposed to kill more of the enemy with his sword than any other officer in American army. Supposedly he killed 75 guys with his sword. Now, he stayed on with Greene. He did all the fight, but he was his quartermaster. So he gets to see the rest of the war. But his days of being a partisan, that was it. After the war, he went back to practicing law. He's one of the guys he was the framers of the Constitution. But unfortunately, he had to do something at court, so he wasn't there the day they signed it. Otherwise, he would have been the signer of the Constitution.
Wow.
He created the very first state university in America. He's the guy that created the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Let's see, what else? Oh, after the war, he was made a brigadier general, and he was elected governor of North Carolina in 1798.
Yep, the 10th governor.
Well, what's funny is in 1800, we had almost like a phony war. They called it the quasi-war with France. We were fighting France. What we're doing is we're basically fighting Napoleon. And it was kind of messed up. It was not like a declared war. It was just kind of like a half-assed war. But John Adams, the president, chose Davy to go over there and make the peace with France so we'd stop the fighting. He went over there and negotiated the peace, and it worked. But basically, he had a pretty stellar career after the war.
This is a guy definitely every Pinelander ought to know about.
Yeah.
Whether you're from South Carolina,
yeah.
whether you're from North Carolina or South Carolina, this is a huge figure in our history.
Yeah, not a lot is written about him. I mean, there's only a handful of books. And
what would you say, Pat, is the definitive work on Davy? I mean, if you had one book to read and you wanted to learn more about.
How about Pat's book? Nothing Pat's but blood and slaughter.
I will.
It might be. It might be Pat's book.
I will say that my book has almost everything you can read about Davy is in my book, Nothing But Blood and Slaughter.
Yeah, that's probably the book.
But Davy wrote a book And you can get it online. I mean, hang on. I don't know if we got a second here. I can look it up for you. This will just take a second.
And for our listeners, Pat's book is called Nothing But Blood and Slaughter. I believe you have 3 volumes to that. Is that correct?
4.
4 volumes.
It's
okay.
Everything that happened in the Carolinas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, hang on. Let me look up. I got my bibliography.
These are
here.
for anybody interested in the Revolutionary War in the Carolinas. This is these are the books to read.
Yeah.
This is the definitive work on UW or anything else interesting in the Carolinas.
All right, here it is. You can actually find this online. It's not long because Davy, he wasn't a guy that wrote about himself in grandiose terms. He just wrote about this is what happened. But there's something called the Revolutionary War Sketches of William R. Davy. And like I said, you can find it online, but it's just the Revolutionary War Sketches of William R. Davy. That's where I got most of my information from, his quotes. Now, the other information, like for example, his first battle, I didn't even talk about his first battle, how he got wounded. That's kind of a ballsy thing because he wasn't even a partisan yet. He was a major in charge of a dragoon militia. And there's a battle called Stono Ferry in 1779. It's when the British were coming up trying to take Charleston. And during the battle, he got wounded. He knocked off his horse. Now, he's sitting there, knocked off his horse, and the British are charging at him. And he's like, I could run or I could take him on. And he draws his sword and he's sitting there literally ready to take on an entire British cavalry charge. But what happened was one of his own men saw what was about them, rides out, basically, and gives Davy his horse and throws him on it because Davy's wounded, and then Davy is able to get away. Unfortunately, the guy that he saved him was captured, and then later on they were fought together at a place called 96, and he ended up getting killed in that fight. But basically, what that tells you something about the guy. He's not going to run away. He's literally about to do a Leroy Jenkins against an entire British cavalry charge with a sword because it's like, well, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out swinging.
Nice. Yeah, definitely a guy that's worth studying.
He's that guy that, you talk about this sometimes, Paul, that guy that just enters into battle and considers himself already dead.
Yeah.
He's just got he just got nothing to lose, and if he comes out alive, it's like, wow, okay, that turned out well.
Yeah, very.
He wasn't married. Yeah, he was a single guy, not married. Like I said, he was described as like one of the better looking men in the colonies. So he had his choice of any woman he wanted to, but he didn't go that way. He was just a very reserved. I'm not going to say mellow because a guy who kills 75 guys with a sword, I wouldn't say mellow, but
yeah,
he's just a very reserved guy. That's why I like to compare him to like Delta Force guy, a very reserved, not blatant in your face, screaming and hollering kind of thing.
He in this way, he's also almost like antithetical to. My gosh, my brain's not working here.
Sumter?
Marion. Sorry. Marion has said that his sword barely ever came out of the doggone scabbard. So,
yeah.
So this guy, he's like, I'm there.
Yeah, he's in the front. He's leading the way.
Yeah.
Now says here he married a Sarah Jones in 1782.
After the war.
Yeah, after the war. Like you were saying, I mean, he's a prominent individual. I don't think you'd had any problem getting the ladies.
No.
Died at age 64. Buried in Chester County, South Carolina, or at least died there. I'm not sure if he was buried there. But
he had a plantation. His plantation was called Trivoli.
Yeah,
and it's in Lancaster County, South Carolina. So,
is it?
I'd have to look on the map where that is.
Well, I tell you, I'm hoping places like that are open for tourists.
Well, there's a good chance. You got to realize any plantation from the 18th century may not exist anymore.
That's true.
Either due to Yankees burning it down, or just falling into disrepair. So I don't know if it's still around or not.
Just neglect, right?
Hey, if you could sum up this guy's career, maybe a couple points, something that we could take and extract and maybe give to the practitioner today?
Or maybe even like some of his like most prominent leadership characteristics.
Yeah, his leadership traits. We've got to realize, number one, something about the guy made people want to follow him. Now, I don't know what that is because they didn't write about it.
His
You got to realize his 80 guys, the Bloody Corps, were dedicated. I mean, they were going to follow him no matter what. The fact that his one troop rode out in front of a charge to hand him his horse, that says something right there. The other thing is the guy really he used intelligence and reconnaissance to make sure to assess the situation. Good example is the very first Flat Rock fight where he realized he can't attack the fort, but hey, look, there's this thing out there, and I'll just ride in there like I'm one of them. In other words, he did all that with assessment. Same thing with Wahhab's plantation. He knew the Highlanders in one area. He cut them off by hitting each end of the main avenue of approach, and then go through the cornfield to smash them. So you can have basically one hammer and two anvils. And so he very good at reconnaissance and intelligence.
He was an innovator. You were talking about the night ambush. I mean that's a ballsy move.
Urban warfare. Urban warfare. Stuff like that didn't happen in the 18th century.
I mean, this guy is very creative. He's thinking outside the box here.
Well, also using his men to their best advantage because he knew the snipers, the riflemen, because you had rifles and muskets. Rifles shoot farther, muskets you shoot less. So his best shots, he gave them missions like that at the Charlotte Courthouse, where hit the officers. Or or even during the Battle of Hanging Rock, where go ahead and take those guys from the Prince of Wales American Regiment, take those guys out. So he knew how to use his men to their advantage. And the other one is like I said, it's just discipline. It goes back to whatever he did with his men; they would not go against him. So when Sumter's men got drunk and stupid at the Battle of Hanging Rock, Davies' men did not. Oh, by the way. After that, Davy also said he didn't want to fight with Sumter anymore, so he passed.
Nice.
He didn't like Sumter.
Yeah, definitely a guy that worth emulating. Yeah, definitely a guy worth more study. Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm thankful that you brought this guy out of the history books, and then you were able to outline his life. And then his tactics he used. That's awesome. Yep. And for those guys, you might want to. I don't think I've read all 3 or 4 volumes of your work either. Nothing but Blood and Slaughter, but I wouldn't mind hitting that and then learn a little bit more about him.
Yeah, it's the when I wrote those books, it was just all these little fights that I never saw in history books, and no one ever wrote about them much.
Yeah, and that was kind of your motivation also is who's ever heard of this guy? I mean, the guy did made some big moves, had he not made, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we don't
even know who he was.
If you got a PhD in North Carolina history or something, I mean, obviously you're going to know this guy, but the average Tar Heel or Gamecock is probably not heard of this guy, which is amazing. Listen,
there's a Davie County.
Well, that is true. That is true. There's a lot of counties that you can. I mean, obviously, are named after our heroes and significant.
Davie County probably don't know what it's for.
And that's probably true. But listen, I mean, when you're talking about the Revolutionary War, I mean, how many Davies are out there? How many guys like this that we just haven't heard about?
Yeah, it's quite a few. There's a lot more of these little guys I could talk about later on.
Awesome. And we're definitely going to have a backpack because this is a big hit. People just love these episodes, and they love. I mean, there's a lot of history buffs out there. I mean, not just Paul and I, but we just love, especially learning about American history and some of these really interesting characters that really made a difference in where we're at today.
Yeah, thanks for taking us back to the past, Pat. Thanks for bringing us back to the roots of Carolina. Appreciate you, my friend.
Not a problem.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us today for another episode of the Pinelander. Hope you'll check out our sponsors, Blacksmith Publishing. We have titles written by Warriors for Warriors. We also have a lot of cool swag in the general store. You can go to Pinelander1776.com to check that out. And Blacksmith Publishing is still pursuing our American Agoge Project, developing our country's next generation of warriors. It's high time we start getting warriors again back in this country that can push back against some of this nonsense we're seeing. But anyway, thank you for joining us, and we until next time, keep your head on a swivel, and viva la Pineland.